Hey guys, tonight we step into the dim and smoky glow of a medieval forge. You hear the bellows wheeze, the hammering against iron, and smell that faint cocktail of soot, sweat and burning hoof. The walls drip with heat, not condensation, and sparks leap like fireflies every time the hammer falls. You're standing where a blacksmith does his daily grind, and let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last more than 5 minutes in here before begging for air. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward in the heat, feeling sweat break across your forehead before you've even picked up a hammer. The forge roars louder than you expect, like a dragon's breath trapped in stone walls. Your shirt clings instantly, and you can't shake the idea that this job is less about art and more about surviving a constant sauna with a side of danger. That glowing iron rod you see on the anvil, it has the same casual energy as a sleeping cat. Quiet 1 second, claws out the next. The difference is, instead of scratches, you're looking at burns deep enough to brand you permanently. Here's the mainstream fact tucked into the background. Medieval blacksmiths weren't just making fancy swords for knights, they were the backbone of a village. Everything from ploughs to nails to cooking pots passed through these fiery hands. Without them, the daily life of peasants and nobles alike would have been much harder. And yet, despite their importance, blacksmiths didn't live glamorous lives. No one threw parades for the guy who fixed the hinges on the church door. But here's the quirky tidbit that might surprise you. Smiths sometimes use crocodile dung, yes, actual crocodile dung mixed into their quenching waters. Why? Because it was believed to add mystical strength to the blade. Imagine dipping your hard-earned sword into a bucket of steaming swamp muck while villagers cheer about its magical protection. Your job was already dirty, this just added another layer of EU. Historians still argue whether medieval smithies were community hubs buzzing with conversation, or places so suffocatingly hot that people avoided them unless they needed something fixed. The truth probably shifted depending on the season. In the winter, the smithy might have been the only warm place around, drawing folks in like moths to a flame. In summer? Well, only the truly desperate would willingly step inside because it was less cosy warmth and more slow cooker hell. Your ears adjust to the constant clang. Every strike sends vibrations up your arm, shaking your teeth, making you question whether ringing in the ears was considered an occupational hazard back then. Spoiler, it was. But no one had a medieval OSHA brochure lying around to warn you. The bellows groan, the smoke curls, and you wonder how lungs ever survived a lifetime of this. You cough once, twice, and realise no masks, no filters, just raw charcoal smoke filling your chest. Romantic, isn't it? You feel the weight of the hammer in your hand, and here's your reality check. This isn't some sleek ergonomic tool with shock absorption. It's basically a lump of metal on a stick, and you are expected to swing it thousands of times a day. Your muscles scream within minutes, and you start to understand why smiths had forearms that made them look like human tree trunks. Modern gym goers would call it a workout. Medieval smiths just called it Monday. As the sparks continue to fly, you sense that blend of monotony and danger. One wrong swing and you're not just missing the anvil, you're smashing your own fingers into flat pancakes. And yet you press on, because without this work, your family doesn't eat. Without this heat, your neighbours don't plough their fields. The forge is your livelihood, your prison, and in some weird sense, your stage. You're both invisible and indispensable, sweating in obscurity while the village depends on your fire to keep moving. You wipe your brow, but it does nothing. The sweat just replaces itself instantly. Tonight, you're not simply standing in the forge. You're stepping into the long, grueling years of an apprenticeship, the medieval blacksmith's rite of passage. Picture this. You're maybe 12, maybe younger, shoved into this firelit cave with nothing but hope and a pair of blister-prone hands. Your parents shook hands with a master smith, signed you away for 7 to 10 years, and now you're basically free labour with a side of shouted instructions. Your daily grind? You don't get to make swords or horseshoes right away. No, you start with hauling buckets of water, gathering charcoal, stoking the fire, and fetching tools like an unpaid intern with less coffee and more bruises. And forget weekends, there are none. Apprenticeships weren't summer camps, they were boot camps without graduation caps. The blacksmith gets cheap labour, and you get a lifetime of back problems before you're even 20. Mainstream fact here, in much of medieval Europe, blacksmith apprenticeships typically lasted around 7 years. That was the standard across guilds and towns. You weren't considered a full-fledged journeyman until you'd served every single day. Which, by the way, was also a good way to make sure you didn't run away halfway through. By the time you finished, your whole life was basically hammer-shaped. Quirky tidbit to drop into your sleepy ears. Apprentices were sometimes punished not by beatings, though yes, those happened too, but by being made to hold hot irons, not glowing red, just uncomfortably warm, until their arms shook like jelly. Think of it as medieval strength training with a side of humiliation. If you dropped the iron, you'd get laughed at by older apprentices and scolded by the master. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether apprenticeships were universally brutal, or if some masters treated their boys like family. Some records show meals shared and bonds built. Others suggest apprentices were little more than house servants with hammer duty. The truth? Probably both. Depends on whether you got lucky and landed with a decent mentor, or an angry old man who saw you as disposable. And since luck wasn't evenly distributed, your odds were 50-50 at best. Now let's not forget the emotional grind. Imagine being 12 years old, staring at a glowing forge, hands shaking from exhaustion, and still being yelled at because you're too slow on the bellows. Your friends? They're out chasing geese or throwing stones at the river, and you're stuck inhaling smoke, wondering if your lungs will last till next summer. If you complained, the answer was simple. This is how it's always been. You can almost hear the rhythm of the bellows, your arms pumping, leather squeaking, the fire hissing in response. It feels like you're fighting to keep a dragon alive, and the dragon never thanks you. Oh, and the master blacksmith. He doesn't care about your sore arms. If the fire dies, it's your fault. If the iron cools too much, you get blamed. Apprenticeship was basically learning to take responsibility for everything while having control over nothing. Here's your cheeky modern aside. You'd probably quit after day 2. You'd storm out, demand a refund, maybe leave a bad review on medieval Yelp. 1 star, overheated, underfed, boss yelled a lot, would not recommend. But no, apprentices couldn't just walk away. You were bound, both legally and socially. Run off, and you'd be branded unreliable. Word spread fast, and no other smith would take you. Your only career option after that? Probably mucking out pigsties. There's also the tiny matter of food. Apprentices usually lived in the master's house, which meant eating whatever scraps were left after his family. Sometimes it was hearty stew, sometimes it was stale bread and thin beer, and sometimes it was nothing because you worked poorly today. And yes, alcohol counted as water back then. Kids drank watered-down ale because plain water could make you sick. Imagine sipping warm barley juice after a 12-hour day of hammer fetching. Cheers! You hear the clanging again. Steel on steel, and realise you're not even allowed to hammer until years in. Apprenticeship is all about patience. First year, sweep floors. Second year, pump bellows. Third year, haul water. Maybe by year 4 you get to hold the hammer for a few minutes while your master watches like a hawk, ready to shout if you miss the mark. And yes, you will miss the mark, and yes, he will shout. You lie back in your bed of straw at night, body aching, smoke still clinging to your hair, and realise tomorrow will be the same. The only difference is maybe, just maybe, you'll get to hold tongs instead of broomsticks. Congratulations, you've levelled up from sweaty helper to slightly sweatier helper. And the saddest part? You dream about hammers, nails and fire. That's how deeply it seeps in. You start to believe that your life has no meaning outside of this smoky cave. And in a weird way, you're right. The forge doesn't just make iron tools, it forges you. It bends you, reshapes you, and by the time you emerge years later, you're either hardened like steel or brittle, ready to break. The bellows creak in your hands, leather stretched and wooden handles slick with sweat. This is your main job now, keeping the fire alive, and trust me, it's less glamorous than it sounds. You're basically the medieval version of a human fan, hunched over, heaving up and down while the forge responds with a begrudging roar every time you push. Miss a rhythm and the flames sputter like a stubborn campfire after rain. Overpump and sparks leap out, singing your eyebrows into oblivion. It's a strange intimacy. You and the forge in this endless tug of war. The fire never rests, which means you never rest. Your arms burn long before the iron does. It's said a forge fire could reach up to 1,500 degrees Celsius when properly stoked. You, the apprentice, don't care about numbers. You just know it feels like the sun decided to rent a room next to your bed and crank up the thermostat. Mainstream fact to tuck under your blanket. The bellows weren't optional extras, they were essential. Without them, iron couldn't heat enough to be malleable, and nothing got forged. The entire economy of a village might slow to a crawl if a forge went cold. That's how vital your pumping arms were. And yet, no one ever carved a heroic statue of anonymous apprentice holding bellows. Quirky tidbit for tonight. Some blacksmiths were known to use not one, but two apprentices on a giant double bellows system, each boy alternating pushes so the air flowed constantly. Imagine the coordination needed, like synchronized swimming, but instead of water you're breathing coal smoke, and instead of applause you get yelled at for falling out of sync. Historians still argue whether smiths used pit bellows, giant floor-based contraptions, or suspended lever bellows in different regions. Archaeological finds hint at both, but the exact design often depended on local wood supplies and regional traditions. One thing everyone agrees on: whichever style, they squeaked, groaned, and demanded constant attention. If you hated repetition, you were in the wrong trade. The soundscape of your life is relentless. Wheeze, groan, hiss, clang. It's like living inside a medieval percussion band, except you're the drummer who never gets a break. And here's the kicker. Apprentices sometimes fell asleep mid-pump. What happened then? The fire cooled, the master screamed, and the poor kid probably got a swift boot or worse. Imagine drifting into dreamland only to be yanked back by a hammer bellowing across the room. You cough into your sleeve. The charcoal smoke curls upward, darkening the rafters. Without chimneys as we know them, many smithies just vented smoke through a hole in the roof. That meant the room was a constant haze, thick enough to sting your eyes until tears rolled. Your lungs? Let's just say if you made it to middle age without hacking up soot, you were considered lucky. No medieval word for asthma, but plenty of people probably lived with it. Here's a modern aside. Today you'd install a fan or air purifier, maybe file a workplace complaint. Back then, your only option was to suck it up, literally. You and smoke were lifelong roommates. Who needs incense when you've got burning hoof and molten iron fragrances wafting around? The repetition gnaws at you. Push, pull, hiss, clang. Hours blur together until you forget whether it's morning or evening. Your only clock is the hunger gnawing at your belly and the master's mood swings. The forge becomes less a workplace and more a rhythm, like a heartbeat you can't escape. And every so often you catch yourself staring into the fire, mesmerised, convinced the glowing coals are staring back, mocking your exhaustion. Your arms ache, your back aches, and still you push the bellows because without air the fire dies. And if the fire dies, the master's wrath feels worse than the heat itself. The irony? You're keeping alive the very blaze that's draining the life out of you. It's almost poetic, if poetry came with blisters. And when you finally collapse on your straw pallet at night, ears still ringing from hammer strikes, you dream of pumping bellows. You dream of pushing air into a fire that never dies, of sparks chasing you down endless hallways, of the hiss of iron in water echoing forever. And then you wake up sweaty, only to find the dream was just practice for another day exactly like it. You stumble into the forge again, arms already heavy before the hammer even lifts. Tonight it's not just the bellows weighing you down, it's the gnawing awareness that iron itself is scarce, expensive, and constantly in short supply. You look at that precious bar of raw metal on the bench and realise it's worth more than you are. Every strike matters, every shaving, every spark that flies off feels like coins fluttering into the wind. Mainstream fact to tuck in as you drift. In much of medieval Europe, iron wasn't abundant. Ore had to be mined, smelted, transported and traded. Processes that demanded enormous labour. Villages often recycled old iron tools, melting down broken ploughshares to create new ones. Nothing was wasted. If you bent a nail, you didn't toss it aside. You straightened it with care, because forging iron from scratch cost dearly in both effort and money. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths were so desperate for scrap that they scavenged old battlefields after skirmishes. Broken swords, dented helmets, even bits of chainmail were hauled back to the forge. Imagine creeping around where knights had just fought, gathering bent metal like a medieval scrap dealer. all while trying not to think too hard about the fact that this recycled iron may have been lodged in someone just yesterday. Historians still argue whether iron scarcity was universal across medieval Europe or more regional, with some areas rich in ore while others relied heavily on trade. England, for example, had ironworks by the 13th century that produced enough to export, while isolated villages in other parts of Europe rationed every last nail. The debates continue, but the lived reality for many smiths was simple. Iron was never abundant enough to waste. So here you are, hunched over, rationing like a miser. The master watches your hammer like a hawk, scolding if you strike too far off centre and chip away more than necessary. Each spark feels like a dagger to his heart. He reminds you, again and again, that metal is money, and you're burning coins into the air. Your hammer rises slower, more careful, because mistakes aren't just clumsy, they're costly. Modern aside, imagine working at a job where every typo on your keyboard cost $10. You'd type very, very carefully. That's what forging was like. Every crooked nail, every uneven shoe, was a tiny fortune evaporating into smoke. No wonder smiths developed reputations as perfectionists. Sloppy work meant poverty. You look around the workshop, noting the piles of bent nails, discarded clippings, and tiny shavings gathered in bowls. Nothing is thrown away. Even those little spirals shaved off when filing down a blade are hoarded, melted again into some lumpy, good-enough tool. Waste not, want not. It was less a proverb and more survival strategy. But scarcity breeds anxiety. You dream of iron shortages like modern folks dream of losing Wi-Fi. What happens if the next trader doesn't bring ore? What if the last shipment rusts before it arrives? Your whole livelihood depends on a material that's as fragile as it is strong. One humid season, one bad storm during transport, and you're out of work. Your belly growls as you watch the glowing iron bar shrinking under the hammer, thinner with each blow. The master mutters that every fraction counts, that each bar must stretch into as many tools as possible. You nod, silently, even as your arms scream from fatigue. Efficiency isn't optional, it's your religion. And when you finally step away, wiping soot across your face, you understand why iron has been called both the backbone and the bane of medieval life. It held kingdoms together, ploughed fields, armed soldiers. But for you, it's a constant reminder of how little you control. You don't own the ore, you don't set the prices, you just hammer away, sweating your life into every glowing piece until nothing remains but ash, fatigue, and the faint hope tomorrow brings another shipment. Your hands look older than the rest of you. Calluses so thick they feel like leather, fingertips mottled with tiny white scars from stray sparks, and a set of blisters that never quite get the chance to heal before the next batch appears. The forge doesn't care how tender your palms are. It demands skin, sweat, and sometimes blood. The hammer in your grip isn't light. It's a lump of iron that smashes red-hot metal into shape, but each strike transfers some of that heat right into you. The handle grows slick, the head glows faintly after hours of pounding, and the smell of scorched wood mingles with the sting of burned flesh. You shake your hand, but the sting lingers. You mutter something under your breath, half curse, half prayer, and swing again. Mainstream fact to nestle into your pillow. Burns were the blacksmith's constant companion. Gloves, as we know them, weren't widely used in the smithy because thick fabric would ignite or stiffen. Instead, smiths relied on tongs, timing, and sheer nerve. And if you got burned, you probably rubbed some goose fat or herbs on it and kept hammering. No sick leave, no compensation. A quirky tidbit to soothe you while you drift. In some villages, smiths were rumoured to spit on burns immediately, believing their saliva had protective power. Picture that. Your hands sizzling like bacon, and your first instinct is to spit on it like you're seasoning a pan. Gross? Absolutely. But you take whatever comfort you can get when aloe vera hasn't been invented for your corner of Europe. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths worked bare-handed more often than not. Some depictions show them with rudimentary wraps or leather pads, while others portray them gripping tongs with bare, scarred hands. The lack of consistency suggests practices varied widely, but one thing's clear, no smith escaped the forge unmarked. You watch your skin bubble where a stray coal lands, and for a moment you consider letting out a scream. But instead you grit your teeth because that's what's expected. Pain is background noise here. You don't announce every sting, you swallow it like smoke in your lungs. You learn to ignore the little hurts until they pile into something permanent. And permanent they are. A smith's hands are his signature. Crooked fingers from fractures, missing nails, the occasional absent fingertip. If you lived long enough, you wore your trade literally carved into your body. Some might call it honourable. You might just call it exhausting. Modern aside, imagine working at a job where every wrong keystroke singed your skin, where every email you sent left a blister. That's the life of the medieval smith. Efficiency wasn't just rewarded, it was the only way to survive without turning yourself into a human brand. The forge light dances across your battered palms, highlighting scars like a map of past mistakes. Each one tells a story, this from a nail that slipped, that from a sword quenched too fast. You laugh softly, because the irony is obvious. You forge iron into shape, but the fire forges you. Every mark is a reminder that the forge always takes its share. And when you finally collapse onto your pallet at night, you can still feel the phantom heat. Your palms tingle, your skin throbs, and even in dreams you see the glow of molten metal. You flex your hands in your sleep, trying to shake off pain that clings like soot. Tomorrow, you know, the blisters will split, the calluses will harden, and the scars will multiply. The forge doesn't just build tools, it builds scars, and you're running out of room. The hammer clang fades into a dull rhythm tonight, and instead of swords or hinges, you find yourself staring at a bucket filled with nails. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Tiny, unassuming pieces of iron that will vanish into wood beams or wagon wheels. Never praised, never admired, but absolutely essential. And your job to make them again and again and again. Mainstream fact first. Nails were so valuable in the Middle Ages that abandoned houses were sometimes burned down just so villagers could salvage the nails from the ashes. That's how essential they were. Without nails, doors sagged, carts fell apart, roofs caved in. Every structure in a medieval village rested, quite literally, on the sweat of nail-making apprentices. Quirky tidbit to roll around your head as you drift. In some regions, nail makers were their own specialised craft. But in many small villages, the blacksmith handled it, often by assigning the task to the lowest-ranking apprentice. That meant you. You'd sit at a bench, hammering away at little glowing rods, flattening one end into a head, clipping the other into a point over and over until your eyes crossed. Entire days lost to the dull thud of shaping the smallest, most repetitive object imaginable. Historians still argue whether nail-making was a starter task designed to train apprentices or whether it was deliberately punitive, something masters used to keep boys too busy to complain. Some suggest it taught precision. You learned to control hammer strokes on a small scale before moving on to swords. Others think it was just free labour, keeping you occupied while the master did the work that actually mattered. You sigh as the iron glows faintly orange on the anvil, the tiny rod mocking you. One tap, two taps, flatten the head, snip the end, toss it in the bucket, repeat. By the time you've made 50, your back aches from leaning forward, your eyes blur from staring at glowing metal, and your arm feels like you've been arm wrestling the devil. By the time you've made 500, you've lost the will to count. Modern aside, imagine being told your career in coding begins with typing the same Hello World program 5,000 times. That's medieval nail-making, a brutal initiation in monotony disguised as training. And you're not even allowed to zone out. Miss your mark and the nail bends, wasted iron you'll get scolded for. The sound fills the forge. Ping, 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 the nails pile up in the bucket, each one worth more than you feel. Villagers come in, nod approvingly at the heap and leave without a word of thanks. No one claps for nails. No one sings songs about the guy who forged 1,000 perfect points. You're invisible, hammering your life into little slivers of necessity. The irony, you grow good at it. Too good. Your hands fall into a rhythm, your mind drifts while your arms keep hammering. You start to feel the forge has hypnotized you, like it's teaching you obedience through repetition. And in a way, it is. By the time you've made your 10,000th nail, you don't even flinch at the boredom. You just keep going, because that's the only way forward. And when you finally slump over, wiping sweat with your soot-caked sleeve, you realise something unsettling. Tomorrow will be more nails, and the day after, and maybe for years. Nails become your world, small, sharp, forgettable, yet essential. You lie in bed and see them in your dreams, glowing orange, multiplying endlessly, until even your rest feels hammered into little points. The smell hits you before the sound does. A mix of scorched hoof, singed hair and hot iron fills the air as a farmer drags his restless horse into the yard. Shoeing day again. You grab the tools, rasp, hammer, nails and shoes, and brace yourself. The forge heat already cooks your skin, but now you've got a half-ton animal dancing nervously in front of you. Mainstream fact to settle in your head. Horseshoes weren't just a medieval luxury. They were essential. A horse without shoes wore down hooves quickly on rocky or muddy ground, making ploughing, hauling or travelling nearly impossible. Blacksmiths became part-time farriers, expected to keep not just people's tools in shape but their animals too. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes horseshoes were nailed on with decorated heads, little symbols or patterns stamped into them for luck. Villagers swore by the magic of a shoe hung above a doorway to ward off evil. Imagine you sweating bullets to nail iron to a stubborn horse, while the owner cheerfully talks about how it'll keep witches away. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths doubled as farriers everywhere, or if certain villages had specialists. Some evidence suggests in wealthier towns, farriers split off as their own trade. In small poor places, you were the only option. If a horse limped, it was on you to fix it, even if you'd rather hammer nails into wood than into hooves attached to a living kicking animal. You crouch low, lifting the horse's leg. The hoof presses into your thigh like a sack of bricks, and before you can even rasp the surface, the animal shifts, jerks, and nearly sends your face straight into the mud. Your master barks at you to hold tighter, but your arms already tremble. The horse doesn't care about your sore muscles, it just wants this ordeal over with. The heat of the iron, the sting of hoof smell smoke, it's enough to make your stomach twist. You hammer quickly, praying the nail goes in clean. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the horse jerks, squeals, or worse, kicks. You've heard stories of apprentices getting ribs cracked or jaws shattered from a misplaced hoof. The forge burns your hands, but the horse threatens your whole body. Pick your poison. Modern aside, this is like doing delicate surgery on a patient who can kick you unconscious at any second. Except you're doing it outside, sweating buckets, while the entire village watches and occasionally shouts unhelpful advice like, "He doesn't like strangers touching his back legs." Thanks for the tip, Barnabas. The horse finally stills. You line up the glowing shoe, set it against the hoof, and listen to the hiss as hot metal meets keratin. Smoke curls upward, acrid, nose-burning. Villagers wrinkle their noses, but you can't flinch. You hammer nails through the shoe, careful not to hit the sensitive parts inside the hoof. One wrong angle, and the horse will limp, the farmer will curse, and your reputation will sink. At last, the shoe is secure. The horse stamps once, testing it, then snorts. The farmer grins, pats you on the shoulder, and maybe tosses you a coin if he's generous. You wipe your brow, hand still shaking, knowing another horse waits behind the gate. And another after that. Shoeing isn't a glamorous task, but without it, the village can't farm, trade, or travel. So you keep crouching, keep rasping, keep hammering one hoof at a time, until your back feels like it's been bent permanently into a bow. And when you finally collapse onto your straw bed at night, the smell of scorched hoof clings stubbornly to your nose. You dream of horses stomping in endless circles, of hooves pressing on your chest, of nails that bend no matter how straight you hammer. The forge takes its toll, but the stable leaves its own scars. You wake to the sound of rain pattering against the thatched roof, but there's no comfort in it. The forge may roar with fire, but iron is fickle and moisture is its sworn enemy. You drag yourself into the workshop only to find yesterday's work already spotted with orange. Rust doesn't wait for permission. It creeps in overnight, like a thief stealing the shine from your sweat. Mainstream fact to cradle into your drowsy mind: rust, iron oxide, was a constant plague in the medieval world. With no modern coatings, paints or stainless alloys, every tool and weapon was in a race against decay. Farmers could spend a fortune on a plough, only to find it flaking into uselessness within a few damp seasons. The blacksmith's business was part creation, part endless repair. Quirky tidbit for tonight. Some smiths swore by coating finished iron in animal fat or even blood to ward off rust. Others dunked tools in beer or vinegar, convinced it offered protection. Picture it. Your master solemnly wiping a sword with goose grease while muttering about keeping the damp away, like a chef prepping a Sunday roast. Historians still argue whether rust prevention techniques were widely effective or mostly superstition. Some accounts suggest linseed oil and pitch helped extend tool life, while others describe weapons crumbling mid-battle. What's certain is that smiths spent as much time patching up corroded gear as they did forging new pieces. The fight against rust was never ending, and the forge was always on the losing side. You run your finger along a corroded hinge, flakes falling like dried leaves. Each flake feels like an insult, your hours of hammering undone by one damp night. The villagers don't care about science. They just come storming in, waving rusty nails and dented sickles, accusing you of shoddy work. You try to explain that water eats iron the way rats eat grain, but all they hear is excuses. And so you fix the same tools again and again. The farmer with the rusty plough is back within months. The knight with the mottled sword swears you've cheated him. You patch, polish, hammer, and file, knowing full well the rust will return. It's like bailing water from a sinking ship with a wooden spoon. Pointless, but unavoidable. Modern aside, imagine spending weeks coding an app only for someone to pour coffee on your computer and demand you fix it for free. That's rust. The medieval equivalent of spilled lattes, undoing hard work in seconds. The rain continues, a steady rhythm against the roof. You glance at the forge, wondering if today's work is already ruined before it even leaves your anvil. The damp seeps into everything, tools, nails, even the bellows. You cough as mould creeps across the leather seams. It feels like nature itself conspires to mock your labour. By nightfall, you're too tired to rage. You sit in the corner staring at a bent sickle, half tempted to let it crumble and tell the farmer to plant carrots instead of wheat. But tomorrow he'll be back, waving it in your face, and you'll be forced to hammer life back into something that wants nothing more than to rot away. And when you finally close your eyes, the dreams come. You see iron turning to dust in your hands, nails dissolving before you can strike them, swords wilting like flowers in the rain. You wake with flakes on your skin and wonder if it's sweat or rust. Maybe both. Either way, the forge will demand you start over again. The morning light creeps through the cracks in the shutters, but instead of relief it brings dread, because today, like so many others, you'll have to hand over hard-earned coins before you've even earned them. Taxes. The Lord's collector always arrives with the same smug face, the same leather pouch, and the same reminder that no matter how many nails you forge or ploughs you mend, part of it belongs to him. Mainstream fact to tuck into your half-dream. In medieval Europe, blacksmiths, like nearly everyone else, were crushed under manorial dues and taxes. You owed rent for your workshop, fees to the guild if there was one, tithes to the church, and a percentage to the local lord. By the time you'd paid everyone their share, the coins jingling in your pocket barely covered bread and ale. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some lords demanded payment not in coins, but in goods. That meant a blacksmith might have to hand over a set number of nails, horseshoes, or tools each year, essentially working for free part of the time. Imagine giving away the very ploughs that could have fed your own family just to keep the taxman off your back. Historians still argue whether these taxes stifled innovation or simply kept smiths tied to tradition. Did high dues prevent blacksmiths from experimenting with new techniques? Or did necessity, the constant need to squeeze value out of every scrap, push them toward creativity? The debate lingers, but to you, the smith, it feels less like history and more like a hand in your pocket. The collector's knock rattles the wooden door. You know that sound. You wipe the soot from your face, shuffle forward, and drop coins into his pouch. His grin never wavers, even when you mumble about how little is left for your children. He shrugs, mutters about the Lord's needs, and walks away without a thank you. You stare at your empty palm, heat rising in your chest. Not forge heat, anger heat. Modern aside, imagine payday arriving and the second your check clears, 3 different apps auto-deduct everything. Rent, subscriptions, loans. By the time you see the balance, you're broke again. That was the medieval smith's reality. Working like a mule and still living hand to mouth. The resentment festers. You know, the Lord doesn't shoe horses, doesn't cough through smoke, doesn't feel iron bite into his skin. And yet he eats better, sleeps better, lives longer, all on the back of your labour. You hammer harder that day, sparks leaping like tiny protests, but it doesn't change the weight in your chest. By nightfall you slump into bed, stomach hollow, mind buzzing with the unfairness of it all. You imagine a world where every coin you earn is yours, where your sweat doesn't immediately line another man's purse. But in the morning reality returns. The forge waits, the taxman waits, and you keep hammering because there's no other choice. The forge feels different today, not because the fire burns any cooler, but because the guild looms in the back of your mind. If the Lord's taxes drain your purse, the guild drains your freedom. They stand like iron walls around your craft, dictating what you can make, how you can make it, and when you're allowed to sell it. You don't just hammer iron, you hammer it exactly the way the guild approves. Mainstream fact, steady and clear. Medieval guilds were powerful organisations, part trade union, part cartel, part social club. They regulated apprenticeships, enforced standards, and set prices. In some towns, you couldn't even call yourself a blacksmith without guild approval. Step outside their rules and you risked fines, exile from the market, or worse, being barred from the forge altogether. Quirky tidbit to dangle in your drifting thoughts. Guilds sometimes banned their members from working at night, not because of safety concerns, but because it made people suspicious. Sparks in the darkness looked a lot like sorcery to villagers. Imagine being fined by your own guild for hammering after sunset because someone thought you might be summoning demons. Historians still argue whether guilds help preserve quality or simply strangle competition. Some believe they elevated craftsmanship by preventing fraud and protecting workers' rights. Others say they stifled innovation, keeping smiths chained to outdated techniques. The truth is tangled, like so much iron twisted under too many hammers. You feel the restriction with every blow. Want to experiment with a new hinge design? Forget it. The guild already approved one, and deviation is suspicious. Think you could undercut the competition by charging a little less for nails? Dangerous thought. The guild sets prices, and undercutting is betrayal. You're not just bound to the forge, you're bound to bureaucracy with soot-stained fingers. Modern aside, imagine being forced to write code in an outdated language because the programmer's guild insists it's tradition, and every attempt to upgrade risks expulsion. That's the smith's frustration. Innovation throttled by rules written by men who don't swing hammers anymore. Still, there's a certain safety in the guild. If a farmer cheats you, the guild can enforce payment. If a rival badmouths your work, the guild steps in. But safety isn't freedom. It's like wearing armour that weighs more than the sword you're carrying. You're protected, yes, but you're also suffocating. You return to your bench, eyes on the iron glowing faintly in the coals. The guild's rules echo in your ears louder than the hammer. Your creativity curls up, starved of oxygen. You strike anyway, obediently shaping iron into the same patterns, the same forms, knowing that stepping outside the lines means risking everything. By the time night falls, you stare at your calloused hands and realise they're not just scarred, they're shackled. Not with chains, but with rules, fees and fines. You lie down on your straw mat sighing and wonder which burns worse, the fire on your skin or the rules in your mind. The forge hums with the usual clang and hiss, but today the noise is sharper. Not from the hammer on iron, but from the bickering of apprentices. Rivalries simmer hotter than the coals. You're not alone in this smoky cave. You're elbow to elbow with boys your age, each one desperate to prove himself, each one ready to seize the tiniest scrap of recognition. Mainstream fact to drift on. Blacksmith shops often hosted multiple apprentices, sometimes as many as 4 or 5 under a single master. Competition wasn't just expected, it was engineered. Only one might eventually earn the coveted title of journeyman under that roof. The rest? They might wash out, wander to another town, or fade into obscurity. Quirky tidbit. Some apprentices got so petty they sabotaged each other's work. A misplaced tool here, a dropped bucket of water there. Nothing overt enough to get caught, but enough to make a rival look clumsy. Imagine forging iron with one eye on the anvil and the other on the boy next to you, wondering if he's about to accidentally spill ash on your piece. Historians still argue whether these rivalries produce stronger craftsmen or just broken spirits. Was the constant pressure a crucible forging skill, or was it needless cruelty that crushed talent under jealousy? Surviving records are split. Some smiths wrote fondly of brotherhood, others cursed the years as endless bullying. You feel the tension when the master praises someone else's hinge. The forge seems hotter, your hammer heavier, your own work suddenly clumsy. The other boys smirk, maybe whisper. Recognition is rarer than iron, and today you didn't earn it. Tomorrow you'll swing harder, hoping the master nods at you instead. Modern aside, Imagine a classroom where the teacher insists only one student can get an A, no matter how many earn it. That's the blacksmith shop. Even your best might not be good enough if someone else outshines you. The rivalry bleeds into daily life. Supper at the master's table becomes a silent contest over who gets served first. Chores become races. Who pumps the bellows faster? Who sweeps cleaner? Even sleep feels competitive. Each apprentice determined to wake earlier, to look more eager, to claim invisible points in a game with shifting rules. Sometimes, though, rivalry hardens into camaraderie. When the master is particularly cruel, you and the others share a glance, a smirk, maybe even a stolen laugh. The forge teaches not just skill but survival, and sometimes survival means leaning on the very boys who might steal your future. By night's end, you lie awake listening to their snores, wondering who among you will still be here in 5 years. Will it be the loud one, always boasting, the quiet one, secretly precise? Or you, stubborn enough to endure? The fire sleeps behind the shuttered door, but in your chest the rivalry burns hotter than the coals ever could. The forge is alive with sound, but tonight is not the hammer that overwhelms you, it's the smell. A cocktail of scents, each more offensive than the last, hangs in the thick air. Sweat pours from your body, mixing with soot until your clothes are crusted stiff. The bellows wheeze smoke that clings to your hair, and when the next farmer walks in with a limping horse, the stench of burning hoof adds a nose-curdling punch. You gag, but there's nowhere to run. The smithy isn't just hot, it's rank. Mainstream fact, plain as the soot on your palms. Medieval forges burned charcoal, sometimes mixed with dung or peat when wood was scarce. That meant a haze of acrid smoke coating every beam, every tool, and every lung. Combined with animal hoof smoke from shoeing, the air was less fresh mountain breeze and more permanent cough starter kit. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some places, dried cow dung was prized as fuel. Imagine stacking patties in neat piles, waiting for them to harden in the sun, and then proudly hauling them into the forge to toss into the flames. You thought your job was tough? Try telling your friends your contribution to blacksmithing greatness is cow pies. Historians still argue whether smithies were deliberately placed on the edges of villages because of fire hazards or because of the smell. Some documents suggest both. After all, sparks could set thatched roofs ablaze, but the reek of hoof smoke and dung-fueled fires wasn't exactly something neighbours wanted, wafting through their windows at dinner. You lean against the anvil, wiping soot off your face with the back of your hand, only to realise it makes things worse. Sweat turns the soot into mud on your skin. Your hair reeks of smoke that even river water won't wash out, and your nails are permanently rimmed with black. It's not just a job, it's a perfume you can never take off. Modern aside, imagine finishing a 12-hour shift and realising your deodorant smells like charcoal swamp with notes of singed horse. You wouldn't get a brand deal, unless it was a cruel joke. The villagers don't let you forget it either. You step into the tavern after a long day and heads turn. Not in admiration, but in wrinkled-nosed disgust. No matter how many tools you fix, no matter how much the village depends on your forge, your odour enters the room before you do. You sit alone more often than not because you want to, but because no one wants to share a bench with the smoke cloud. Still you endure. You hammer nails through the haze, shoe horses through the stench, breathe smoke until your chest rattles. You wonder sometimes if you will ever smell anything else again. Bread baking, flowers blooming, even your dreams are scented with charcoal and hoof smoke. And when you collapse at night, your straw bed reeks with you. You roll over hoping for one clean breath, but it never comes. The forge has followed you into sleep, its smell clinging tighter than any chain. The clang of the hammer fades for a moment, replaced by whispers. Not your own, not the master's. Village gossip trickling in through the forge door like a draft you can't shut out. Because in a medieval village, everyone knows everyone, and when your work leaves the smithy, it doesn't just meet the customer, it meets their tongue. And tongues are sharper than any blade you'll ever forge. Mainstream fact to sink into. Blacksmiths were indispensable but constantly scrutinised. A bent hinge on the church door? Whispers spread. A cart axle snapping on the muddy road? Rumours swirl. You could spend 10 hours hammering perfection, but one unlucky flaw turned into the week's entertainment at the well. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed blacksmiths cursed objects they didn't like the customer for. If a neighbour annoyed you, they swore you could slip in a crooked nail or weaken a ploughshare on purpose, condemning their harvest. Imagine the suspicion every crack in a wagon wheel might be your fault. Historians still argue whether smiths were genuinely respected pillars of the community or half-feared outsiders. Evidence leans both ways. In some towns, smiths held high status, even seats in councils. In others, they were treated as necessary but unclean, their smoke-stained faces too close to superstition for comfort. You feel it when you walk through the market. A woman tuts about her broken latch as you pass, loudly enough for others to hear. A farmer mutters that your last set of nails rusted too quickly. The gossip clings worse than soot, and no amount of hammering drowns it out. You nod, keep walking, but inside you grind your teeth. Your reputation is more fragile than the iron you beat every day. Modern aside, imagine working tech support where every bug is blamed on you, even when the user tripped over the power cord. That's your life. Smithy as customer service desk. Every villager convinced they know your job better than you. The gossip warps even the smallest details. Someone sees you drink too much ale. Suddenly you're the drunk smith. A tool breaks years later. Always shoddy, that one. You can't escape it, because the forge makes you visible. Every hinge, shoe and sickle out there is a silent advertisement. If it fails, the ad is bad. You return to the forge, shoulders tight, hammering harder than necessary just to drown out the voices in your head. Sparks leap, iron sings, but the whispers follow you home. At night you lie awake, hearing the village murmur through thin walls, your name wrapped in criticism. You wonder if tomorrow you'll be praised for a perfect ploughshare or mocked for a bent nail, and you know the latter will echo longer. The forge door creaks open, and instead of a farmer or a gossiping neighbour, it's the parish priest. His robes drag in soot, and his face holds that practised look of holy patience. You know what this means? Church work. Not nails, not ploughs, bells, crosses, candlesticks, reliquaries. Sacred ironwork, and you don't dare get it wrong. Mainstream fact for your drifting mind. The church was one of the biggest patrons of blacksmiths in medieval Europe. From massive cathedral bells to the tiniest chalice fittings, iron and bronze work poured out of forges for holy use. Without smiths, half the sacred trappings of Christianity would have remained imagination. Quirky tidbit. Some churches demanded that blacksmiths quench bells in holy water, believing it blessed their tone. Imagine hauling a molten, glowing hunk of metal into a barrel of sanctified water, steam exploding like the wrath of God himself, while the priest sprinkles more on top for good measure. You're not just hammering iron, you're flirting with divine soundscapes. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths held elevated spiritual roles, or were just seen as convenient labour. Some sources hint that the church viewed smiths with suspicion, given their fire and noise branding them half-pagan. Others suggest priests courted smiths as allies, recognising that their skills lent legitimacy to holy power. The truth probably changed from town to town, priest to priest. You feel the weight as you hammer a cross meant to sit atop the church spire. Every strike echoes louder than normal, each one carrying not just iron but expectation. If it bends wrong, if it cracks, if it topples in a storm, the villagers won't blame the priest. They'll whisper about you, the smith who offended heaven. Modern aside, imagine being tasked with building a server for a client who swears it must be blessed by IT saints to run properly. You roll your eyes, but if the system crashes, they'll say you cursed it on purpose. That's the same pressure, only hotter and smokier. The priest watches you with hawk-like eyes, offering little corrections in a tone that suggests divine authority. As if he's the one who's ever swung a hammer. You swallow your irritation and nod, because crossing the church is worse than crossing the guild. Your family needs you in the village, not excommunicated for an unholy ploughshare. By nightfall, the cross is finished. The priest nods, blesses it, and leaves with barely a thank you. You collapse on your straw mat, lungs heavy with smoke, ears ringing with hammer blows that sound suspiciously like church bells. And in your dreams, you see them. Bells swinging above your head, crosses gleaming in moonlight, reminders that even heaven demands its due from your fire. The forge feels heavier tonight, not from the iron itself, but from the shape of what lies on the anvil, a blade. No ploughshare, no hinge, no cooking pot. This is a weapon, a sword destined not for farming or fixing, but for cutting down another human being. Your hammer hesitates a moment before striking, but the master growls, and you bring it down anyway. Mainstream fact to anchor you. Blacksmiths were vital to medieval warfare. Every sword, spearhead and arrowhead passed through their forges. Villages couldn't defend themselves without them, and kingdoms couldn't wage war without their steady hammer rhythm. A campaign was only as strong as the iron in its men's hands. Quirky tidbit: some smiths stamped tiny marks, personal signatures, on blades they forged, almost like branding. Imagine your secret symbol riding into battle on a knight's hip or lying forgotten on a muddy field, half buried in blood and dirt. Pride and horror mixed in equal measure. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths felt pride in their warwork or unease. Some chronicles depict them as celebrated artisans of war, admired for their skill. Others suggest many were reluctant, pressured by lords and kings to produce weapons they knew would end neighbours' lives. The silence of the smiths themselves leaves us guessing. You heat the iron until it glows, then hammer it long and flat. Each strike shapes not just the weapon, but the fate of whoever holds it. You can't help picturing faces. Maybe the farmer down the road, maybe a rival village's son. You don't get to choose who lives or dies, but your hammer decides whether the blade breaks in a fight. That responsibility seeps into your bones. Modern aside, imagine coding a program that you know could be used either to save lives or to crash planes. You don't control the user, only the tool. That's the blacksmith's dilemma. Crafting neutrality, knowing it will be used for anything but. The hiss of quenching feels louder this time, as though the sword itself cries when plunged into water. Steam rises, cloaking you in a ghostly fog. Villagers will admire the finished blade, maybe even cheer the knight who wields it, but you know what it cost. Not just awe and sweat, but the silence of your conscience every time you look at it. When the blade cools, you wipe it clean. It gleams in the torchlight, sharp and beautiful, yet terrible. You know tomorrow you'll hammer another and another. Each one a silent soldier marching out of your forge long before the man who carries it does. You lie awake that night, hearing the clash of steel in your dreams, knowing your hammer set the first blow. The hammer sings again, but this time it's not shaping a sleek sword, it's pounding rivets into plate after plate of dull, heavy iron. Armour work. At first it sounds heroic. The stuff knights wear into battle, the shining shells in tapestries. But when you're the one making it, reality is just noise, repetition and backache. Mainstream fact. Medieval armour wasn't conjured by fairy tale magic. It was hundreds, sometimes thousands of riveted pieces shaped painstakingly by smiths. Each plate had to curve just right. Each link of chain needed closing, each seam reinforced. It wasn't one grand stroke of brilliance. It was weeks of grinding monotony. Quirky tidbit. Chainmail, which looks so fluid and elegant draped over knights in movies, was forged from tens of thousands of individual rings. A single hauberk could take months to complete. Some smiths even employed children just to close rings all day long. Imagine your apprentice years being nothing but bend, close, repeat, until your fingers cramped permanently. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths making armour were admired specialists or just cogs in the war machine. Some guilds glorified armourers as elite craftsmen. Others suggest they were treated no better than nail makers, stuck on the endless treadmill of rivet hammering with little recognition. The truth? Likely a mix. Glory if your patron was rich, obscurity if your clients were peasants. You sit at the bench, a half-finished breastplate before you. It doesn't gleam. It's rough, uneven, demanding hours of filing before it even looks decent. You strike rivets until your ears ring, each one a tiny explosion of sound in the smoky shop. The work feels endless. For every plate you finish, 5 more lean in a mocking stack against the wall. Modern aside, imagine being asked to build a sports car, but all you do day after day is tighten bolts on the frame, never seeing the finished vehicle. That's armour smithing, the illusion of glamour, hiding a mountain of tedium. Your back aches from leaning, your wrists throb from hammering. Even your dreams get caught in the repetition. You dream of rows of rivets, marching in lines, endless as soldiers. Sometimes you wonder if you're forging armour for knights or forging chains for yourself. When the day ends, the breastplate is one step closer to finished, but not close enough. Tomorrow you'll pound more rivets, bend more plates, file more edges. You'll hear villagers praising knights for their shining suits, never knowing you spent weeks hunched in smoke to make it. And as you lie in bed, the last sound in your ears isn't birdsong or lullabies. It's the eternal ring of rivets, echoing in the dark. The forge door creaks open again, and in shuffles a farmer clutching a handful of coins so worn they barely have faces anymore. His voice is sheepish. His eyes avoid yours, and you already know what's coming. He can't pay the full price. Maybe next week, maybe after harvest, maybe when his cousin repays him. The excuses pile up as high as the soot on your rafters. Mainstream fact. Medieval peasants lived on razor-thin margins. Bad weather, sick animals, or a single poor harvest meant no money for tools. Blacksmiths were caught in the middle. Too essential to ignore, but too expensive to pay on time. Many tools were handed over with only part of the fee. The rest promised later. Sometimes that promise never arrived. Quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths accepted barter instead of coin. You might get sacks of grain, a goat, or even a chicken shoved into your hands in exchange for a plough repair. The forge yard sometimes looked more like a barnyard, clucking and bleating while you tried to hammer iron. Imagine being elbow deep in sparks with a goat chewing your tunic. Historians still argue whether barter kept smiths afloat or trapped them in poverty. Some evidence suggests it spread wealth through communities when coin was scarce. Others believe it left smiths chronically underpaid because a few eggs never equalled the weeks of labour that went into forging a sickle. Either way, smiths were rarely rolling in silver. The farmer pleads while you weigh the iron in your hand. Your time isn't free. The fire isn't free. Charcoal costs. Bellows wear out. Apprentices need feeding. And yet, you can't exactly turn him away. His family needs to plant before the season shifts, and if his ploughshare snaps again, hunger will stalk more than just his house. So you hammer the repair anyway. The sparks fly, your arms ache, and when you hand back the mended plough, the farmer presses 2 coins and a promise into your palm. You sigh, knowing the promise won't feed your children tonight. But what else can you do? If you say no, you're the cruel smith who let a family starve. If you say yes, you're the tired smith who starves himself a little in their place. Modern aside, imagine freelancing today with every other client saying exposure will pay you instead of money. Only in your case it's not exposure, it's chickens. Congratulations, you've invented medieval PayPal, poultry as payment. The resentment builds quietly. You watch neighbours haggle harder than they'd ever dare at the market. A pot costs this much, too expensive. Sickle blade? Surely it can be cheaper. Yet these same people will pour money into ale and feasts, then come crawling to you with excuses. You hammer their iron while they hammer your patience. And it isn't just peasants. Sometimes wealthier customers are worse. A minor noble struts in, orders a sword with elaborate engravings, then delays payment for months, insisting his loyal service is worth more than coins. What are you supposed to do? Refuse him? Risk insulting a man who could ruin you with a word? No. You swallow your anger, bow your head, and keep hammering. Your children tug at your sleeve when you come home asking for bread. Your spouse stretches soup thin with more water, sighing as she scrapes the bottom of the barrel. You know you worked a 14-hour day, but the purse on the shelf jingles pathetically when shaken. That sound, hollow, pitiful, is more haunting than any hammer strike. You lie awake, staring at the rafters, imagining all the next weeks that never arrive, all the promises floating in the smoky air of your shop. You dream of coins that never rust, of payment that matches the sweat you pour into the anvil. But dreams don't put food on the table. Tomorrow another farmer will shuffle in, another noble will swagger, and you'll hammer anyway, because refusing means ruin, and agreeing means scraping by. The forge teaches you a bitter truth. Iron bends, but money slips away like smoke. The forge breathes its usual smoky sigh, but this time it's not villagers or nobles at your door. It's strangers. Travelling tinkers, cart rolling in with pots, pans, tools, and a sly smile that tells you trouble has arrived. They don't have a permanent forge, no guild affiliation, no lord's taxes weighing on their backs. They set up shop in the village square, beating out quick repairs with flair and charm, and suddenly your neighbours are flocking to them instead of to you. Mainstream fact. Tinkers were real fixtures of medieval and later European life, wandering tradespeople who specialised in mending pots, sharpening blades, and doing quick and dirty repairs. They filled a niche, especially for the poor, who couldn't always afford a blacksmith's full rate, or who only needed patchwork work done. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some tinkers were also entertainers. They'd sharpen knives while telling bawdy jokes, sing songs while riveting a pan, or charm children with little tricks. Imagine trying to compete with that. Your hammer rings through a smoky workshop while outside, A man is juggling knives and making everyone laugh. Guess who gets the crowd's coin? Historians still argue whether tinkers were beloved or despised. Some accounts paint them as welcome saviours for households too poor to hire smiths. Others brand them as cheats, accused of cutting corners, selling shoddy repairs, and leaving villagers worse off after they left. The truth likely lies between. Some were decent craftsmen, some were snake oil salesmen with hammers. You watch through the smithy door as they set up. A pot with a hole, patched in minutes. A farmer's knife, sharpened with sparks flying, followed by a wink and a tale about dragons. The villagers laugh, pay a few coins, and walk away happy. Meanwhile, you've spent hours forging solid, lasting tools no one claps for. It burns worse than the forge itself. Modern aside, it's like working a 9-to-5 grinding serious code while some influencer makes twice your salary live streaming quick hacks on TikTok. The crowd loves the show, even if it doesn't last. And when the tinkers pack up, leaving behind dented pans that won't last a season, you're left to pick up the pieces. The villagers complain when the patches fail, but they don't admit they went cheap. No, the gossip shifts back to you. The smith must be jealous of real craftsmen. You hammer harder, jaw clenched, wondering why solid work always loses to flashy tricks. The jealousy seeps into your dreams. You see yourself on the road, free of guild dues and taxes, singing while you hammer, coins pouring into your hand. But when you wake, you know the truth. You're bound to this forge, this village, this endless grind. The tinkers come and go with the wind. You remain, chained by both necessity and duty. And so you strike the iron again, sparks leaping, anger simmering. You'll still be here when the tinkers vanish down the road. You'll still be here when their repairs crumble. You'll always be here, hammering in obscurity, while others take the applause. The forge coughs out smoke as usual, but tonight the real weight pressing down on you isn't the hammer, it's your stomach. Winter has arrived. The village fields lie fallow, snow dusts the rooftops, and hunger settles over every household like a second frost. And you, the blacksmith, find your own fire faltering. Mainstream fact, winter was brutal on medieval trades. With no farming to support tool demand and fewer coins in circulation, smiths often saw business dry up in the cold months. Fires cost fuel and charcoal wasn't cheap. Many forges went quiet, not from laziness, but from sheer lack of resources. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some places, blacksmiths moonlighted as musicians, storytellers, or even dice game hosts during the winter lull. If the forge couldn't feed you, maybe your voice, your jokes, or your sleight of hand could. Picture a soot-stained smith shaking dice in the tavern corner, trading iron for alehouse applause. Historians still argue whether smiths truly starved in the off-season, or whether community barter kept them afloat. Some records show neighbours providing food in exchange for deferred repairs. Others suggest smiths simply shuttered and begged until spring. As usual, the truth shifts depending on the village, the harvest, and the luck of the year. You feel the reality with every pang in your gut. The forge fire, once your lifeline, now feels like a thief, eating charcoal you can't replace, demanding labour for customers who can't pay. You still hammer nails, patch ploughs, shoe horses, but fewer come through your door. Most are hoarding what little they have. You find yourself working harder for less, the very rhythm of your trade turned upside down. Modern aside, it's like being a contractor during an economic crash. Suddenly no one needs new projects, and you're left offering discounts, chasing overdue invoices, and wondering how to stretch beans into a week of meals. The cold gnaws at you even in the forge. Your hands stiffen, making every strike clumsier, every burn sharper. The bellows creak slower, leather hardened by the frost. You stare into the fire not for iron's sake, but for warmth. The forge becomes less a workshop and more a fireplace you're chained to. Your spouse sighs as she stretches stew thinner, adding more water, fewer vegetables. The children cough in the cold, their straw bedding no match for icy draughts. You wonder how many nails equal enough bread, how many horseshoes equal enough firewood. Barter becomes survival, not business. Then comes the cruelest irony. Sometimes villagers pay you not with food, but with promises. After spring planting, they say. After the thaw. Promises don't fill bellies. You go to bed with your stomach grumbling like the bellows, your dreams filled with visions of steaming bread you can't afford. And yet you return each morning. You pump the bellows, hammer the iron, coax the fire to life because the forge is all you have. Even starving, you cling to it. Winter strips the village bare, but you bend over the anvil anyway because stopping feels like surrender. When night falls, you lie awake listening to the wind rattle the shutters, wondering if tomorrow brings work or just more hunger. You pray the snow melts quickly, but deep down you know the forge might survive the winter. You're less certain about yourself. The forge sighs with heat, but tonight the work waiting for you is stranger than iron. A villager stumbles in, not with a ploughshare or a broken hinge, but with a swollen cheek and a tooth that looks like it's declaring war on his jaw. He points at your soot-stained hands, mutters something about you being good with iron, and suddenly you're not just the smith, you're the village's makeshift healer. Mainstream fact. In many medieval communities, blacksmiths doubled as folk doctors. The reasoning was simple. You worked with fire, iron and tools, and people assumed that gave you special skills for dealing with bones, teeth and infections. Pulling teeth, setting broken arms, even lancing boils, these fell into your reluctant job description. Quirky tidbit. Some smiths actually made their own dental tools. Iron tongs for yanking rotten teeth, hooks for scraping, and even crude braces hammered into shape. Imagine the terror, lying back on a rough bench while the village blacksmith looms over you, soot on his face, hammer still warm, holding iron pliers meant for horseshoes but now destined for your molar. Historians still argue whether this role made smiths respected or feared. Some chronicles say villagers trusted the smith's magic hands. Others suggest patience only came when desperation outweighed terror. After all, when the barber surgeon was miles away and the priest's prayers didn't work, the smith's pliers were the only hope left. You grip the iron tongs, heart pounding louder than the bellows. You've pulled nails from planks but never teeth from skulls. The villager groans, sweat dripping, clutching the bench. You mutter a prayer, or maybe just a curse, and clamp down. One yank, a scream, a crack. The tooth comes free, root trailing like a worm. Blood spills, and the man spits into the dirt. Then, impossibly, he smiles through the pain, thanking you as if you were a saint. You're left holding a bloody tooth with shaking hands, wondering when your forge turned into a surgery. And it doesn't stop with teeth. A child with a twisted arm? The smith knows bones. A farmer with a splintered shin after falling in the fields. The smith can set it. You fumble with splints, wrap with strips of cloth, and use iron clamps as improvised braces. You're terrified half the time, but the villagers don't care. To them, your strength and tools are proof enough. Modern aside, imagine being a mechanic fixing engines all day, only for your neighbour to knock on your door and say, "Hey, could you do open heart surgery while you were at it?" You're good with tools. That's your life, except the tools are glowing iron and the patients don't have anaesthetic. You try to protest, but refusal isn't an option. The village doesn't separate healer from craftsman, they just see you as the man with steady hands and access to hot metal. You even hear whispers that fire purifies, that your forge smoke wards off sickness. You want to laugh, but when the plague rolls in, those same whispers turn into prayers. People beg you to burn charms, to forge iron crosses, to keep death away. The line between craftsman and magician blurs. Sometimes you're praised as a healer, other times feared as someone meddling with unnatural power. You can't win. You're just trying to keep the forge hot, the family fed, the tools working. But at night, lying in your straw bed, your dreams are full of teeth cracking in your pliers, bones snapping under your hands, villagers groaning in the dark. You hammer in your sleep only to realise it's not iron. It's ribs, it's skulls, it's flesh. You wake shivering, sweat soaking through, wondering if you've become something other than a smith. Or maybe this was always the job. Healer, craftsman, half-sorcerer. The forge makes more than tools, it makes burdens, and tonight you carry them all. The forge spits sparks as you hammer, but tonight it isn't just firelight that makes you uneasy. It's the way villagers look at you from the shadows. They don't see only a craftsman anymore. They see a man who bends metal with fire, who draws sparks from stone, who coaxes light and shape from invisible heat. To them, it looks suspiciously like sorcery. Mainstream fact. Medieval people lived in a world where superstition coloured daily life. Blacksmiths working with fire, noise and transformation often straddled the line between admired artisans and feared magicians. In some regions, smiths were believed to have the power to ward off evil. In others, they were accused of dark dealings. Quirky tidbit. In Ireland, smiths were sometimes thought to have the ability to curse or bless newborns simply by touching them. In parts of Scandinavia, a horseshoe nailed above a doorway wasn't just practical, it was believed to repel witches and demons, thanks to the smith's enchanted work. Imagine being thanked for making a horseshoe one day, and whispered about as a potential demon friend the next. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths courted these rumours deliberately, enjoying the aura of mystery, or whether they resented them. Did they exaggerate their powers to keep villagers respectful, or were they victims of fear, one unlucky rumour away from being accused of witchcraft? The record leaves more smoke than clarity. You feel it when the children linger at the forge door, staring as though waiting for sparks to spell words in the air. You feel it when women mutter about your fire, keeping away the night spirits. And you feel it when the priest passes, gaze narrowing, lips tightening, as though wondering whether your bellows pump air or infernal whispers. Modern aside, it's like being a computer programmer today, and half your neighbours think you're either a genius wizard or a hacker plotting their downfall. They don't understand your tools, so they fill the gap with fear and imagination. One evening you hammer out a sickle for a farmer. As you hand it over, he glances nervously and asks if you put any curses into the blade. You laugh, but his expression doesn't change. Another time, a mother begs you to forge an iron amulet to protect her baby from fairies. You oblige, hammering a nail flat and stringing it on twine. She kisses your hand in gratitude. You stand there, soot-stained and confused, wondering when you became both blacksmith and talisman maker. But whispers cut both ways. When a cow falls sick or a roof beam cracks, suspicion drifts your direction. The smith's sparks angered the spirits, someone says. He put too much fire in the iron. You can't fight the gossip. It spreads faster than any flame. You hammer harder, hoping your work will drown it out, but superstition lingers like smoke in the rafters. At night you lie awake listening to the hush of the village outside. You think of sparks leaping from the anvil, twisting into shapes of demons in the air. You think of villagers muttering about fire and shadows, and you wonder, are you feared because you shape iron, or because you remind them how fragile they really are? The forge glows, the sparks fly, and you realise you don't just make tools, you make stories too, and sometimes those stories weigh heavier than iron. The forge heat clings to you, but tonight it's not sparks or hammer strikes that weigh on your chest. It's the sound of your children's small voices echoing from the back room. They aren't playing, they're working. Tiny hands turning the bellows, fetching water, hauling scraps of charcoal that weigh nearly as much as they do. The blacksmith's fire doesn't wait for adulthood. Mainstream fact. In many medieval households, children were pressed into labour as soon as they were able. Sons of smiths often became apprentices by default, not by choice. Daughters carried water, cleaned the shop, and sometimes even learned small forging tasks, though few guilds recognised their work. Childhood wasn't an age of innocence. It was an early draft into survival. Quirky tidbit, some guilds actually charged a fee to register an apprentice, even if it was the blacksmith's own son. Imagine having to pay money just so your child could be allowed to help you officially at the forge, while he'd been covered in soot since he could walk. Historians still argue whether blacksmith families prospered from keeping the trade in-house, or whether it crushed generations under the same burden. Was the legacy of a forge a proud inheritance, or a trap that kept sons bound to bellows and anvils with no other way out? Surviving records offer both stories, dynasties of respected smiths, and lines of men who never escaped the smoke. You see it in your children's faces, their cheeks streaked with soot, eyes tired long before their years. The younger one struggles to lift a hammer, grunting, teeth clenched, determined to imitate you. The older one coughs in the smoke but keeps the bellows pumping because the fire can't go out. Your spouse watches with weary resignation, balancing ledgers in her head. Food, debt, taxes, while stirring a thin stew stretched too far. The weight of family doesn't just sit on your shoulders, it drives every hammer blow. You can't stop. If you rest, your children go hungry. If you falter, the family drowns in debt. Every blister you've earned, every scar on your hands, you now see mirrored in their small shaking fingers. Modern aside, it's like working a night shift, dragging yourself home, only to see your kids logging into online jobs just to keep the Wi-Fi bill paid. No one gets to dream, everyone gets drafted. And still, The villagers don't see the sacrifice. They see only the tools in their hands, the nails in their walls, the horseshoes on their animals. They don't see the children coughing in the smoke, the spouse stretching bread thinner than parchment. They don't see you sitting at the anvil long after dark, not because you want to, but because the family ledger demands it. You collapse into bed, children curled on straw nearby, their small hands blackened like yours. You whisper a promise to keep hammering, to keep feeding, to keep the forge alive so they don't have to. But deep down you know, the forge doesn't let go. It will shape them as surely as it shaped you, branding their lives with fire before they even understand what freedom means. And as you drift into uneasy sleep, the sound of their coughing becomes part of the forge's rhythm. Bellows, hammer, wheeze, sigh. The family is welded to the anvil, whether they wish it or not. The forge burns low tonight, but the workbench is bare. No ploughshares waiting, no hinges stacked, no horses lined up for shoes. Outside, the village is silent in a way that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. You know this silence. It's the same hush that comes when the plague slips through the fields, creeping house to house like smoke through rafters. Mainstream fact. The Black Death of the 14th century wiped out nearly half of Europe's population, but outbreaks of plague and lesser epidemics struck long before and long after. Villages emptied almost overnight. Shops closed, churches overflowed with prayers, and trade came to a standstill. Blacksmiths, like everyone else, saw their livelihoods collapse under the weight of death. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, desperate villagers demanded smiths forge plague charms, iron crosses, amulets, or even iron shoes nailed to thresholds, all meant to ward off the sickness. Imagine being asked to fight invisible disease with hammers and sparks, while bodies piled in the streets. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths fared better or worse than others during plague years. Some say their skill gave them steady work making nails for coffins and hinges for churchyards. Others suggest suspicion fell on them when sparks and smoke were mistaken for curses that invited the sickness. What's clear is that survival was mostly chance, not craft. You stand in the doorway of your forge, staring at the empty road. No farmers come, no gossipers linger. The air itself feels heavy, thick with dread. A neighbour passes, face pale, eyes darting, clutching a bundle of herbs to her chest. She doesn't even nod to you. Fear builds walls higher than stone. Then comes the priest, dragging a cart with bodies covered in linen. You recognise one, an apprentice from another trade, a boy who used to share ale with you at the tavern. Your stomach knots. If the plague can take him, it can take anyone. Modern aside, it's like watching your town go into lockdown, shops closing, neighbours crossing the street to avoid you, while your job, already fragile, evaporates overnight. Only there are no hospitals, no vaccines, just prayers and iron charms. You hammer anyway, though your hands shake. A villager begs for iron nails to seal his shutters shut, convinced the sickness rides on the wind. Another demands you make an iron amulet to hang over his bed. You know it won't help, but you can't refuse. You hammer iron into hope, because hope is the only thing selling, and then it hits closer. Your apprentice coughs in the corner, face pale, sweat soaking his tunic. You rush to his side, but what can you do? You're not a healer, only a smith with soot on your hands. His fever climbs, his eyes glaze, and within days his bed is empty, straw still indented where his small body lay. The forge feels cursed now. Every hammer strike echoes too loudly in the silence of the village. You wonder if the fire itself is a beacon for death, if the sparks leap into the night not as light but as warnings. You want to close the door, let the coals die, but you can't. If the forge sleeps, you starve. If you keep it alive, you risk feeding more than just iron. You risk feeding the plague itself. At night you lie awake, ears straining to hear coughing from the next room, terrified it will be your children, your spouse. You pray, you bargain. You promise to hammer every hinge in the kingdom if only the sickness spares your home. The fire burns on, but for once it doesn't feel like survival. It feels like waiting, for the knock on the door, for the silence after the last cough. The forge hisses as usual, but tonight you notice something deeper than the hunger in your stomach or the ache in your arms. The charcoal pile is lower than it should be. You shovel the last chunks into the fire and know the truth. The forest is shrinking. Mainstream fact. Medieval forges devoured wood. Charcoal was the lifeblood of blacksmithing, and to keep fires hot enough for iron, enormous amounts of timber were felled. In some regions, entire forests disappeared, leaving villagers scrambling for fuel. Smiths had to travel farther, pay more, and ration every spark. Quirky tidbit: some smiths grew so desperate they tried burning dried peas, nutshells, or even dung when charcoal ran out. The fires sputtered, smoked, and stank, but sometimes it worked just enough to finish a job. Imagine hammering a sword forged on goat droppings. Heroic? Maybe not. Functional? Sometimes. Historians still argue whether deforestation from forges was severe enough to change medieval economies. Some say the constant demand for charcoal forced lords to regulate forests harshly, restricting villagers from cutting trees. Others suggest it wasn't until later centuries that fuel shortages became catastrophic. Either way, to you the smith, the forest feels thinner every season. So you march with cart and axe, tramping miles into the woods to find decent timber. Your legs ache, your back bends, and all the while you think, this is time stolen from hammering. When you return, your hands blister not just from iron but from chopping trees, hauling logs, and feeding fires that never stay full. You're smith and woodcutter both, prisoner to an appetite bigger than your own. Modern aside, it's like paying half your salary just to charge your laptop because the power grid's failing. You can't stop, you need the machine, but the cost drains you dry. At night, lying sore on your straw bed, you hear the forest in your dreams. Not the rustle of leaves, but the echo of axes, the groan of falling trees. You wonder if someday the forge will cough one last time, starved of fuel, and your life's work will vanish not in sparks, but in smoke. The forge is hotter than ever, but tonight the messenger's seal makes it burn even brighter. A royal commission. The king himself demands swords, armour, or perhaps a great gate hinge for his fortress. It sounds like glory, but you know the truth. A king's order is a coin toss between fortune and ruin. Mainstream fact. Monarchs and nobles frequently commissioned blacksmiths for weapons, armour, and castle fittings. These orders could elevate a craftsman's status, but failure to deliver, too late, too weak, not ornate enough, brought punishment, sometimes severe. Quirky tidbit: one story tells of a smith who forged a ceremonial sword so poorly balanced that it flew from the king's hand during practice. The punishment? Public humiliation. He was forced to carry the broken weapon through the streets tied around his neck. Imagine the sweat dripping down your back while the whole town laughs. Historians still argue whether royal commissions were golden opportunities or gilded traps. Some smiths won favour, becoming royal armourers with steady pay. Others were bankrupted by the impossible demands of luxury or punished when deadlines slipped. Your hammer doesn't decide which way it falls. You strike harder, sparks showering, every blow echoing with fear. If the blade holds, you might be praised. If it bends, you might lose more than coin. The king's eyes are colder than any quenching bath. Modern aside, it's like being asked to build software for a billionaire. You either become famous overnight or sued into oblivion. High stakes, no middle ground. Oh. When the work is done, you watch servants carry it away. Your stomach twists. Glory or punishment, tomorrow will decide. And you, lying sleepless on your pallet, know you've bet your life on the rhythm of your hammer. The court summons you, not to praise your work, but to laugh at you. Nobles in silk wrinkle their noses at your soot-stained tunic, point at your blackened nails, chuckle at your smoke-filled smell. The jesters join in, juggling toy hammers, mocking your bent back. The same men who demand your blades now laugh at the man who makes them. Mainstream fact. Blacksmiths rarely held high status in noble courts. Their work was indispensable, but their appearance, their smell, and their rough manners set them apart. Nobles wanted their products, not their company. Quirky tidbit. Jesters sometimes used blacksmith tools in their routines, banging tongs together like cymbals, mocking the clumsy clank of the forge. Imagine watching your sacred livelihood turned into a punchline while lords sipped wine. Historians still argue whether smiths ever achieved genuine prestige. Some records list master armourers paid richly by courts. Others show smiths relegated to the kitchens and stables, treated as glorified servants. Status flickered like sparks, bright but gone in a blink. You bow, cheeks burning hotter than your forge. You want to remind them their polished armour, their sturdy gates, their sharp swords, all came from your blistered hands, but you stay silent. In their world, your soot stains are entertainment, not honour. Modern aside, It's like tech CEOs mocking the IT guy for having dirt under his fingernails while ignoring that he keeps their servers alive. The hypocrisy burns hotter than coal. At night you hammer harder, sparks leaping like insults, but the laughter follows you into dreams. Even there, you're the butt of jokes, soot on your face while nobles clap. Your body doesn't rise as quickly as it once did. Every swing drags pain from your spine, every lift of the hammer grinds your shoulders. You're not old, barely 40, but you feel older than the stones in the forge wall. Mainstream fact: most medieval smiths broke down young. The labour ruined backs, shoulders, lungs. Few reached 50 with their bodies intact. Crippling arthritis, hernias and chronic coughs were badges of the trade. Quirky tidbit: some guilds even had funds to support smiths crippled by the hammer. Picture a brotherhood of men in their 40s, hunched, wheezing, trading stories of how the fire bent them as surely as they bent iron. Historians still argue whether smiths lived shorter lives than other craftsmen. Some data suggests they died earlier from smoke and strain. Others argue their constant work kept them strong longer than peasants in the fields. The truth? Pain either way. You feel it every dawn, knees stiff, hands swollen, lungs burning before the bellows even wheeze. You hammer anyway because stopping isn't an option. But each strike carries a whisper. Your body is running out. Modern aside, imagine retiring at 40 not with luxury but because your spine refuses to lift another tool. Except there is no retirement. You keep hammering until you can't. At night you collapse, body groaning louder than the anvil. Dreams offer no escape, only visions of yourself hunched forever, trapped in a forge where even sleep can't straighten your back. The forge fills with sound again, but this time the product isn't glory, isn't survival, it's legacy. A bent ploughshare, a bucket of nails, a horseshoe nailed crooked. This is what you leave behind. Not monuments, not crowns, but iron that rusts before the year is out. Mainstream fact: few smiths' names survived history. Their tools fed villages, their weapons armed wars, but their identities vanished. Immortality belonged to kings, knights and priests, not the men who forged their steel. Quirky tidbit: occasionally a smith carved his mark into a blade or hinge, a tiny symbol only he would recognise. But centuries later those marks fade, forgotten among countless anonymous blows of the hammer. Historians still argue whether common craftsmen's legacies mattered to their communities. Some believe villagers remembered smiths fondly for generations. Others insist the man was forgotten the day his successor lit the forge. You hold a ploughshare bent from rocky soil. You hammer it back knowing it will bend again. That's your immortality, a cycle of repair, never glory. Your name may never be carved in stone, but every meal the village eats carries your unseen work. Modern aside, it's like writing code that runs a system millions depend on, yet no one remembers your name. You're invisible but indispensable. At night you wonder, is a bent ploughshare enough legacy? Or will history swallow you whole, sparks fading into darkness? The forge crackles, but outside whispers of new thunder echo, gunpowder. Cannons roar in distant wars, and suddenly your swords and shields feel like relics. Mainstream fact: by the late medieval period, gunpowder weapons began replacing traditional arms. Cannons broke castle walls, muskets pierced armour. Blacksmiths who once armed armies saw their craft diminished, their skills less central to war. Quirky tidbit: some smiths tried pivoting to making cannonballs, essentially trading swords for spheres of iron. From elegant craftsmanship to brute mass production, progress felt less like pride and more like drudgery. Historians still argue whether gunpowder truly ended the blacksmith's golden age. Some say it destroyed the demand for swords and armour. Others argue smiths simply adapted, forging guns and tools instead. Either way, the prestige of hammering a knight's blade waned. You hammer a sword out of habit, but it feels hollow. You know somewhere. Smoke rises from cannons louder than your hammer. The forge suddenly feels smaller, your work less vital. You're no longer at the centre, you're fading to the edges. Modern aside, it's like being a master typewriter mechanic the year laptops arrive. Your skill remains, but the world moves on. At night you lie in silence, sparks dim, wondering if the fire will outlast the noise of gunpowder. The forge flickers one last time. You shovel the last coals, banking them carefully, the way you've done 1,000 nights. The hammer rests, the anvil cools. You lean back, soot settling over you like a blanket. The village sleeps outside, fields waiting for morning. You breathe deep, chest aching but steady. and let the silence embrace you. The fire glows faintly, a heartbeat in the dark. It will wait until morning until the hammer calls again. For now, you drift, body sinking into straw, mind hazy with sparks that fade into stars. The forge hums like a lullaby, and the world grows soft. The rhythm slows, the fire no longer roars, it sighs, a gentle breath in the darkness. You feel the weight of years melt into the coals, each spark softer, each glow fainter. The hammer's echo fades, no longer sharp but distant, like thunder far across a valley. The smoke rises not to choke you, but to curl like incense, wrapping you in a haze of comfort. Your body eases, the calluses, the burns, the aches, they all loosen their grip as though the forge itself has finally released you. You're no longer holding the hammer. You're no longer straining against the bellows. You're simply lying back, soot on your skin, peace in your chest, listening to the last song of the coals. Outside, the village sleeps. No gossip, no tax collectors, no tinkers undercutting your work. Just silence. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then quiets. The night air seeps cool through the cracks, balancing the forge's warmth. You close your eyes. The forge light glows behind your eyelids, soft and steady, like a lantern leading you into rest. The burden of iron, of wood, of endless labour, all of it drifts away. You're not forgotten, not mocked. You're simply at rest, surrounded by the steady hum of a world you've kept alive with every strike. The coals dim, but they don't vanish. They wait for dawn, for another day. For now, though, you don't have to. You can let go. You can sink deeper into stillness. The fire keeps you safe, the night keeps you quiet, and sleep carries you like a gentle tide. Sweet dreams.